I never thought my marriage to Jason would end like this. In the early days of our relationship, everything seemed perfect. Too perfect in hindsight. Jason and I met when we were both in our 20s, both ambitious and both filled with dreams of a promising future. We got married 2 years later, full of hope for what lay ahead. But as the years went by, cracks began to form. At first, they were small, things we could easily brush off. But over time, they grew deeper and wider until we could no longer ignore them. The biggest issue between us was money. More specifically, how Jason handled it. My dad had always been there to help us when we were in need, offering loans or advice, but Jason never appreciated it. He saw my dad's support as interference, and it became a constant source of friction between us. Things took a dark turn when Jason borrowed $50,000 from my dad to start his own business. I believed in him, trusted that he would make it work, but he didn't. His business floundered, and instead of paying back the loan, Jason started making excuses. That's when the real trouble began. I tried to reason with him, but his pride got in the way. He refused to admit failure, and worse, he started talking about declaring bankruptcy, as if that would erase all the problems he had created. Jason's attitude towards the debt was infuriating. He seemed to think that just because we were struggling financially, my dad's loan didn't need to be repaid. "It's just family money," he'd say with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Your dad can afford it." But I knew better. My dad wasn't a rich man, and the $50,000 he lent us had come from his hard-earned savings. It wasn't just a loan. It was a gesture of trust, of love, of believing in Jason's potential. And Jason was squandering it. I couldn't understand how he could be so cavalier about something so important. Every time I brought it up, he'd brush me off, or worse, get angry. "I'll pay it back when the business takes off," he'd snap. But the business never took off. In fact, it got worse. Jason started missing payments on other bills, and soon we were drowning in debt. That's when he first mentioned bankruptcy. "If I declare bankruptcy, I don't have to pay it back, right?" he asked one night, as if he were discussing something as trivial as what to have for dinner. I was horrified. Bankruptcy wasn't just an easy way out, it was a last resort, a drastic measure that would have long-lasting consequences. But Jason didn't seem to care. All he wanted was to escape the debt, no matter what it cost. Things came to a head when my father fell ill. I got the call late one night, and I knew immediately that something was wrong. My mom's voice was shaky, and she never called me that late unless it was an emergency. "Sophia," she said, "your dad collapsed." My heart sank. I felt a wave of panic wash over me as she explained that he had been feeling unwell for a few days but hadn't wanted to worry anyone. Now, he was in the hospital and the doctors were running tests. I told Jason about the situation, expecting him to be supportive, but his reaction was anything but. "Do we have to go?" he asked, annoyance clear in his voice. "I mean, your dad will be fine, right? Do we really need to drop everything?" I was stunned. This was my father, the man who had helped us countless times, and Jason couldn't even muster the decency to show concern. "Of course we're going," I said firmly, "and you're coming with me." After some grumbling, he agreed, but it was clear that he wasn't happy about it. I tried not to let his attitude dampen my spirits as we packed our bags and prepared to leave for my parents' house, but deep down, I felt a growing sense of unease. If Jason couldn't even care about my dad's health, what else was he capable of disregarding? Before we left, we had to figure out what to do with Luna, our dog. Normally, we would have taken her to a pet sitting service, but our usual place was fully booked. Jason suggested we ask his sister, Emma, to watch her. The mere mention of Emma made my skin crawl. Emma had a history of being unreliable. Worse, she had borrowed money from us in the past and never paid it back. I didn't trust her, and the thought of leaving Luna with her filled me with dread. "She needs the money," Jason said when I expressed my hesitation. "She's good with animals. It'll be fine." I wasn't convinced, but with no other options, I reluctantly agreed. Before we left, I hid all our valuables, just in case. I didn't tell Jason, but I knew Emma's track record. If she got desperate, she might help herself to more than just a few dollars. With that uneasy decision made, we set off for my parents' house. The drive was long and tense, neither of us speaking much. My mind was on my dad, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was going to happen while we were gone. When we arrived at the hospital, my dad was stable. Izrinia, but the doctors still weren't sure what had caused his collapse. They ran more tests, and we waited anxiously for the results. Jason's mood didn't improve while we were there. He complained about being bored, about the hospital food, about having to spend time with my family. I tried to ignore him, focusing on my dad, but it wasn't easy. I could feel the tension between us growing with each passing day. When the doctors finally gave us the all clear and said my dad could go home, I was relieved. But that relief was short-lived. As soon as we got back to our house, I noticed something was wrong. The drawer where I had hidden some cash was open and $1,000 was missing. My heart sank. I knew immediately that Emma had taken it. When I confronted Jason about it, he brushed me off again. "You're being paranoid," he said. "Emma wouldn't do that." But I knew better. I had set a trap, placing a piece of paper in the drawer so I would know if it had been opened, and it had. I felt a wave of anger and frustration wash over me. How could Jason defend his sister when it was clear she had stolen from us? Things escalated quickly after that. I demanded that Jason call Emma and confront her about the missing money, but he refused at first, insisting that it was all a misunderstanding. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could he be so blind? I had been patient up until this point, but my patience was wearing thin. I told him that if he didn't call her, I would. Reluctantly, he agreed. When Emma finally arrived, I confronted her directly. At first, she denied everything, but as I pressed her, the truth came out. She had taken the money. Not just this time, but the last time too. I felt a mix of anger and betrayal. Jason tried to smooth things over, telling me that Emma would pay it back, but I didn't care about the money anymore. This was about trust, and Emma had broken it. Worse, Jason had defended her, even when the evidence was clear. Our marriage was hanging by a thread, and this felt like the final straw. I knew things would never be the same between us after this. In the days that followed, Jason and I barely spoke to each other. The tension in our house was palpable, and I could feel the distance between us growing with each passing day. I knew that we were heading for a breaking point, but I didn't know when or how it would happen. Then one day, Jason handed me a piece of paper. I looked down and saw that it was divorce papers. I felt a wave of shock wash over me. "You want a divorce?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I think it's for the best," Jason said, not meeting my eyes. "We're not happy. We haven't been for a long time. There's no point in dragging this out." I felt a mixture of anger and sadness. This was the man I had married, the man I had built a life with, and now he was ready to throw it all away. But as I stood there, holding the divorce papers in my hands, I realized that part of me agreed with him. We weren't happy. We hadn't been for a long time. Maybe it was time to let go. With a heavy heart, I signed the papers. The divorce went through quickly. We sold the house and split the assets, though there wasn't much left to divide after all the debt we had accumulated. Jason promised to use his portion of the money to continue making payments to my dad, but I knew better. He had never kept his promises before, and I didn't expect him to start now. After the divorce was finalized, my dad's health continued to decline. He passed away a few months later, and I was devastated. Losing him felt like losing the last connection to the life I had once had. But as difficult as his passing was, it brought with it a new responsibility. I inherited the right to collect the debt that Jason still owed my dad. I wasn't looking forward to having that conversation, but I knew it had to be done. A few weeks after my dad's funeral, I called Jason to remind him about the payments. His response shocked me. "I'm not paying anymore," he said bluntly. I was speechless. How could he be so callous? "Your dad's gone, Sophia. There's no reason to pay anymore." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Jason had always been selfish, but this was a new low. I tried to reason with him, explaining that I had inherited the debt, and it was still his responsibility to repay it. But Jason didn't care. "I'm done with that," he said. "I've got my own problems to deal with. My business is failing. I can't afford to pay you." I felt a surge of anger. This wasn't just about the money, it was about respect. My dad had helped Jason when he needed it most, and this was how he repaid him. I couldn't let it go. If you don't start making payments, I'll take legal action, I warned. Jason laughed. Go ahead, he said. It won't matter. I'm filing for bankruptcy. My heart sank. Bankruptcy. The word hung in the air like a dark cloud. I knew what that meant. If Jason declared bankruptcy, I might never see a dime of what he owed. But more than that, it meant that Jason was willing to go to any lengths to avoid taking responsibility for his actions. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. How had it come to this? How had the man I once loved become someone I barely recognized? Jason went through with the bankruptcy just as he had threatened. I got a text from him a few weeks later, gloating about how his debts had been wiped clean. Debt's gone. Serves you right, the message read. I didn't respond. What was there to say? Jason thought he had won, but I knew better. Bankruptcy wasn't a free pass. It came with consequences that Jason clearly hadn't considered. I had a friend who had gone through bankruptcy, and I had seen firsthand how difficult it was. It wasn't just about losing money, it was about losing everything. Your credit, your reputation, your ability to rebuild. Jason didn't realize it yet, but his life was about to get a lot harder. And sure enough, a few months later, I got another call from him. This time, he wasn't gloating. He was desperate. Sophia, I need your help, he said, his voice shaky. This bankruptcy thing, it's ruined me. I felt a wave of satisfaction. Jason had made his bed, and now he was lying in it. I can't get credit. I can't get a loan. I've lost everything. Please, you have to help me, he begged, but I had no sympathy left for him. You made this choice, I said coldly. Now you have to live with it. Jason continued to call me over the next few weeks, each time sounding more desperate than the last. But I ignored him. I had moved on with my life, and I wasn't going to let him drag me back into his mess. The bankruptcy had destroyed any chance of reconciliation, not that I had been considering it in the first place. I had learned a lot from my marriage to Jason. Mainly, that trust and respect were the foundation of any relationship. And once those were gone, there was no going back. Jason had crossed too many lines, broken too many promises, and I wasn't about to let him hurt me again. Eventually, the calls stopped. I heard through mutual friends that Jason's life had continued to spiral downward. His business had officially gone under, and he was struggling to make ends meet. He had alienated most of his friends, and even his family was starting to distance themselves from him. As for Emma, she had gotten into trouble of her own. It turned out she had been stealing from more than just us. She was arrested for theft and lost her job. It was a fitting end for both of them, I thought. Looking back, I realized that the divorce was the best thing that could have happened to me. It freed me from a toxic relationship and allowed me to rebuild my life on my own terms. I learned valuable lessons about trust, responsibility, and self-respect. If I ever get into another relationship, I'll be more cautious, more discerning, and more willing to walk away when things don't feel right. I won't make the same mistakes twice. Jason may have thought he was escaping his problems by declaring bankruptcy, but all he did was create new ones. He's living a miserable life now, and I can't say I feel sorry for him. He made his choices, and now he's paying the price. As for me, I'm finally free. Free from the debt, free from the lies, and free from the person who once held me back. I have a new sense of peace and purpose, and I'm excited for what the future holds. It wasn't an easy journey, but I came out stronger on the other side. And for that,